Hey all, Professor Wyman here with another little concept video. So this video is on reverse scoring. And again, this is conceptual. I'm going to show how to calculate this by hand as part of the discussion of the concept of reverse scoring. But then I have following videos that talk about calculating this in Google Sheets, Excel, and then SPSS. So first of all, what is reverse scoring? You want to think about what a construct is. So in psychology, we measure a lot of variables, a lot of things that vary among people by measuring constructs. And so a construct is something that we can't easily measure. We can't just, poke a needle in you and find out how much self-esteem you have, right? So we have all these different constructs that include different ways like attitudes, emotions, personality traits. And so the idea of a construct, measuring a construct, if we use a questionnaire and or some other way that we're collecting a number that we assign to a question response, we're creating a score, and the score should be set up in a way where a high score indicates a lot of that construct. So if I did a self-esteem questionnaire, a high score on self-esteem would mean that I have higher self-esteem. So reverse scoring happens when you have questions that are phrased in a way where the high score actually means the opposite of what you're trying to measure. So a high score on a reverse scored self-esteem question would actually mean low self-esteem. So we need to switch it back. We need to fix it. So why do we bother using that? Because that seems like extra work, right? Why are we creating extra work for ourselves? There's actually good reason to do it. It can improve our construct measurement. It allows us to measure that construct in more ways. If we look at a negative attitude or a reverse scored measurement of that construct. So we also can reduce this agreement bias. It's also called the acquiescence bias, but basically it's this tendency of survey responders to agree with statements. There's a lot of different reasons for that, which I'm not going to get into in this video. And then also it reduces careless responding. So I know some of you shared your surveys with, or will share your surveys with friends who might not really be invested in the survey. And maybe they're not paying as much attention to it. They're just helping out their friend who needs some survey responses for class, right? I know you can't imagine that happening. So this careless responding, if you have questions that are all phrased in the same direction, they're all getting at this like high self-esteem value, people might not pay as much attention. Whereas if you throw in a question that's reverse scored, it kind of switches things up and it brings their attention back. So there's some benefits to doing reverse scoring. I'm going to do an example. I'm going to use Machiavellianism. I have other videos that use Machiavellianism data. And so this Machiavellianism is one of the dark triad traits of personality. And it's really this idea of willingness to manipulate, not caring about, hurting other people in this drive for power, this wanting to achieve things or get things. Machiavellianism, a high score would mean that you're high in this personality trait, and a low score would mean that you're low in this personality trait. So again, you want to keep this in mind as you're doing this. So here I'm using Christie and Geiss's Machiavellianism scale. It's the Mach 4, and there are many items. I just have 5 that are listed here. As an example. So our response options range from 1, which is disagree, to 5, which is agree. So again, 5, agreement, if we're looking at it in the correct direction, should be high in Machiavellianism. So for example, this fictional person has put in 5 for Mach for item 1, 5 for 2, 1 for 3, 1 for 4, and 5 for 5. So here, the first item says, never tell anyone the real reason you did something unless it is useful to do so. So that sounds like that fits our Machiavellianism definition. This says good face validity. And this, if you say that you agree with it, 5, this would indicate more Machiavellianism in this question. So this is correctly scored. This is not reverse scored. Item 2, let me use my arrows here. So this is correctly scored, right? And then we have, that would be our true score, would be our 5. So this item 2, the best way to handle people is to tell them what they want to hear. Again, this fits in with our Machiavellianism construct definition. There's that manipulativeness in there that you are strategizing in what you're going to tell people based on whatever your goals are, right? So this, again, a high score means high Machiavellianism. This is pointed in the right direction, so we're going to keep this score. Now, I have put R's here. This is typical notation for a reverse scored item, is that you have an R in parentheses after the question. One should take action only when sure it is morally right. So this is opposite of the Machiavellianism construct. If you are high in this question, it's saying that you are strongly you're moral in your actions, or that people should be moral in their actions. Machiavellianism is more morally loose. There's not as much of this adherence to moral action. So this is the wrong direction. So when a person puts 1 here, it doesn't mean that they're low in Machiavellianism, which is what these other questions were. What's happening here is that you have a lower response here that should actually mean higher Machiavellianism. So we need to reverse score this question. So when you're reverse scoring, the way you want to think about it is that it's the opposite response. So you can look at this conceptually and say, oh, the opposite of 1 is going to be 5, right? If we're going to say that it's disagree, the opposite is agree. If they slightly disagree, the opposite is slightly agree. There is a mathematical calculation for this, though. So what we're going to do is I'm going to write out the calculation. It's pretty straightforward. You just have to use it. And there are different ways that you can do this. So it's going to depend on what program you're using. So what we will do here, you can see that we have our total score of 1, right? The first thing you want to do is identify your highest possible score, which is a 5, right? So our 5, if we draw out our 5 here, and then we're going to say, we want to take our highest possible score. Whatever your highest score is, you're going to add 1 to it. So our total is going to be 6. So if you have a 5-item scale, you're always going to start with 6. And then what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to take 6 minus the score, and that's going to reverse it for me. So if I go over here and I say, okay, I have a 1 here, right? I'm going to take my 6, I'm going to say minus 1 equals 5. 5. And that is going to be my new score. So you can see that if you're doing this by hand, that could take a while. You have to go through and rescore everything. Fortunately, we have the magic of our technology that we're going to do in the next video, and I'll show you some shortcuts on this. So we now have 5 here. So this, again, we're just saying that this variable, this question rather, that's part of this variable, this question is asked in the opposite direction from the other questions. So we just need to flip it. And that's what we're doing here. So we're taking this reverse scored question and we're making it the correct direction, which would be here, this 5. So now in 4, this is also reverse scored. So again, you can think of it as the arrows are pointing down, that this is going in the wrong direction. Most people are basically good and kind. If you strongly agree with this, or if you agree with this, because that's our highest option, that would indicate low Machiavellianism, right? So we need to reverse score this, and that becomes a 5. And then we have the last question. You'll have to forgive my arrows are off here. But this last question, it is safe to assume that all people have a vicious streak and it will come out whenever they are given a chance. You can see how based on this item 4, those are really opposite, right? And if you agree with this question, you have more Machiavellianism. So this is correctly, this is in the correct order. So this idea of reverse scoring is just to make sure that your construct that you're measuring, that a high score matches that construct, that you're measuring all of your questions in the same direction. So again, this was just a concept video. The next videos are going to go into more detail on how to do this in SPSS and in Google and Excel.